Emily Carter did not expect the weekend to begin with a sudden sense of unease. But as she stood by the front window watching the rain blur the quiet Oregon street, she felt it anyway, a feeling she could not name. Because when her phone rang earlier that morning, and her best friend, Sarah, asked if her teenage son Noah could stay for 2 nights, Emily had agreed without thinking, assuming it would be easy, harmless, and temporary. Yet now, as the doorbell rang and she opened the door to find Noah standing there with a shy smile, taller than she remembered, shoulders tense under a damp jacket, something about the moment felt heavier than it should have, not because of him, but because of what his presence stirred in her calm and carefully ordered life, a life that had grown quiet after her divorce, a life she had learned to keep controlled and predictable. And as she welcomed Noah inside, took his backpack, and pointed out the guest room, she reminded herself that this was simply a favor, nothing more, that he was a polite teenager caught between childhood and adulthood, dealing with school stress and a mother who worked too much, and she was just a safe place for the weekend. Yet the house felt different almost instantly, filled with movement and sound as Noah asked where to put his shoes, complimented her living room, and spoke with a respectful nervousness that made her smile despite herself, because it had been a long time since anyone had filled her home with that kind of energy. And as she prepared dinner, simple food, nothing fancy, she listened to Noah talk about his classes, his interest in writing, his confusion about the future, and she found herself answering more honestly than she usually did, sharing small pieces of her own past without going into details, keeping her tone light. But inside, memories stirred of who she had been at his age, hopeful and certain life would unfold gently. And the conversation moved fast, flowing easily, laughter breaking through the awkward pauses. And Emily noticed how natural it felt to sit across from another person again, to listen and respond, to feel useful. And that realization unsettled her because she had convinced herself she was comfortable alone, that the quiet evenings and empty weekends were a choice, not a result of disappointment. And after dinner, when Noah offered to help clean and insisted on drying the dishes, even though he broke one accidentally and apologized too many times, Emily reassured him and sent him to relax. And later, as he settled into the guest room with a book, she stood in the hallway listening to the sound of pages turning, feeling a strange mix of comfort and sadness, because the weekend was already reminding her of something she had buried under routine and responsibility. And when she finally sat on the couch with a cup of tea, the silence no longer felt peaceful, it felt loud, filled with questions she had avoided asking herself for years, about whether her life was truly full or simply safe. And she thought about Sarah, about how different their lives had become, about how motherhood had shaped one and solitude had shaped the other. And she wondered when she had stopped believing that new chapters were possible, because Noah's presence was not changing her world, but it was opening a small crack in it, letting light and doubt slip in together. And as the rain continued outside and the clock moved toward midnight, Emily realized that this weekend, which she had accepted so easily, might quietly challenge everything she believed she had already settled. And though she did not yet understand how or why, she felt certain that by the time Noah left, she would not feel the same way she had when she opened the door that first evening. Saturday morning began earlier than Emily expected, not because of noise, but because her mind refused to rest. And when she stepped into the kitchen, she found Noah already awake, standing awkwardly by the counter as if unsure whether he was allowed to exist in the space without permission. And she smiled, offered him coffee. He politely declined, and suggested pancakes instead, which instantly relaxed him. And as she mixed batter and heated the pan, the house filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with food, because Noah talked freely now, telling stories about school pressure, teachers he liked, friends who felt distant, and the constant feeling of being expected to grow up too fast. And Emily listened carefully, not as a teacher, but as someone who understood the fear of becoming someone you are not ready to be. And the morning moved quickly, laughter breaking out when the first pancake burned and Noah tried to save it anyway. And for a brief moment, Emily forgot the rules she had built around her life, forgot that weekends usually passed in silence. And after breakfast, they decided to run errands, driving through wet streets while soft music played, conversation flowing easily without effort. And Emily noticed how comfortable Noah had become, asking thoughtful questions about her job, her books, her past travels, and she answered honestly but carefully, keeping boundaries clear while still being kind, because she knew her role and respected it deeply. And back at the house, they spent the afternoon doing simple things, folding laundry, organizing shelves, watching a movie Sarah had recommended, and nothing dramatic happened. Yet the emotional weight of the day grew heavier for Emily, because she realized the feelings rising inside her were not about Noah himself, but about the parts of her life she had put away, the parts that once dreamed of family dinners, shared laughter in homes that felt alive. And as Noah talked about his hopes of leaving home for college, about wanting independence but fearing loneliness, Emily felt a sharp recognition, because she had once felt the same and had believed adulthood would bring clarity instead of quiet disappointment. And when evening came and Noah went to his room to video chat with friends, Emily sat alone in the living room, staring at the darkened television screen, understanding something important and painful, that her heart had not grown cold as she had believed. It had simply been waiting. And that realization frightened her more than being alone ever had, because longing meant risk, and risk meant possible heartbreak. And as she prepared dinner and ate quietly, she thought about how easy it would be to close herself again, to return to her safe routine once the weekend ended. But the thought no longer felt comforting. It felt limiting. And later, when Noah thanked her for the day and said he felt relaxed for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a tightness in her chest because she had helped him without meaning to, while exposing something fragile within herself. And as the house grew quiet and night settled in, Emily lay awake in bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house, realizing that this weekend was not about responsibility or obligation, but about awakening. And though nothing inappropriate or harmful had crossed a line, something internal had shifted, something honest and unresolved. And she knew that whatever happened next, she could no longer pretend that her life was complete simply because it was stable, because the presence of another human being, even temporarily, had reminded her that connection was still possible, and that knowledge once found could not be ignored. Sunday arrived with a restless energy that Emily felt the moment she woke, as if the quiet house was holding its breath. And while making breakfast, she received a call from Sarah explaining that her return flight had been delayed again, pushing pickup to late evening. And Emily agreed calmly, but felt an unexpected tension settle in her chest, because the weekend now stretched longer than planned. And as Noah joined her at the table, looking tired but lighter than before, the conversation turned more personal without becoming inappropriate, focusing on change, fear, and the strange feeling of standing on the edge of adulthood. And Emily responded with gentle honesty, sharing how life often moves in directions no one predicts, how disappointment can reshape dreams, and how starting again is never as impossible as it feels. And Noah listened closely, clearly valuing her words. And later that afternoon, while helping Emily carry groceries inside, he casually mentioned that his mother had been seeing someone new, a man named Daniel, and the name struck Emily like a quiet shock, freezing her movement for just a moment before she regained control, because Daniel Harper was not a stranger. He was someone from her past, someone she had once trusted deeply, someone she had almost loved before life took them in different directions. And Noah noticed her pause and asked if she knew him. And Emily answered carefully, saying they had known each other years ago, leaving out the emotions tied to that truth. And the rest of the afternoon passed in a strange blur, because Emily's thoughts kept drifting backward to memories she believed were settled, moments of laughter, unfinished conversations, and choices that had felt right at the time but now seemed uncertain. And as evening approached, Emily checked her phone and noticed a message from an unknown number waiting unread. And when she opened it, her breath caught as she realized it was from Daniel, polite and brief, asking how she was and thanking her for helping Sarah. And the message stirred something she had not prepared for, Not excitement, but recognition. As if life had quietly placed two unfinished chapters side by side. And Emily sat with the phone in her hand for a long time without replying, aware that responding would mean acknowledging a part of herself she had locked away. And when Noah returned from his room to say dinner smelled good, Emily smiled and continued as if nothing had changed, keeping her focus on the present, on responsibility, on care, because she knew that whatever emotions surfaced belonged to her alone and had nothing to do with the boy staying in her home. And over dinner, they talked about Noah's future plans, his fear of disappointing his mother, and Emily offered reassurance without promises, encouraging him to trust his own path. And when night settled and Noah went to sleep, Emily sat alone again, holding the phone, rereading Daniel's message, realizing the weekend had quietly shifted from simple kindness to emotional crossroads, because the presence of Noah had not caused confusion. It had simply reminded her that she was still capable of caring deeply. And Daniel's message now stood as proof that the past was not as distant as she believed. And Emily understood that life was asking her a question she had avoided for years, whether she was willing to open herself again, knowing the risks. And as the house grew silent and the rain returned softly against the windows, Emily finally placed the phone face down, not ready to answer yet, but unable to ignore it anymore, knowing that when the weekend ended, something else would begin, something uncertain but honest. And that realization made her both afraid and quietly hopeful in a way she had not felt in a very long time. Asterisk. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway late Sunday night broke the quiet that had settled over Emily's house. And when she looked through the window and saw Sarah step out, tired but relieved, Emily felt a sudden mix of closure and uncertainty, because the weekend that had started so simply was now ending with emotions she had not expected to carry. And as Sarah hugged her tightly, thanking her again for taking care of Noah, Emily smiled warmly and brushed aside the praise, watching as Noah collected his bag, thanked her with genuine appreciation, and gave a small wave that felt more meaningful than it should have. And once they left and the door closed behind them, the house returned to silence, but it no longer felt empty in the same way, because the quiet now held reflection instead of loneliness. And Emily walked through each room slowly, noticing how the weekend had left subtle traces. A folded blanket on the couch, a mug left by the sink, signs that life had briefly passed through her space. And instead of rushing to clean, she allowed herself to sit with the feeling, understanding that nothing inappropriate or harmful had occurred. Yet something important had shifted inside her. And she returned to the living room where her phone rested on the table, Daniel's message still waiting, and for a moment she considered ignoring it, returning to the comfort of routine. But the weekend had shown her that comfort without connection felt incomplete, and after a deep breath, she typed a simple reply, polite but honest, agreeing to talk sometime soon. And when she sent the message, she felt no rush of excitement, only a calm acceptance, as if she had chosen honesty over fear. And as she prepared for bed, Emily reflected on how the weekend had not been about Noah in the way she first assumed, but about herself, about recognizing that caring for others had reopened parts of her heart she believed were closed forever. And she thought about Sarah, about friendship that endured change, about how life often weaves stories together in unexpected ways. And lying in bed, she realized she was no longer avoiding the idea of change, because the weekend had reminded her that emotional growth does not come from dramatic events, but from quiet moments of truth. And that night she slept deeply for the first time in months. Not because everything was resolved, but because she had accepted that unresolved feelings did not mean failure. They meant possibility. And in the days that followed, Emily returned to her routines with a new awareness, greeting her students with more patience, noticing beauty in ordinary moments, understanding that the weekend had not disrupted her life, it had gently redirected it. And though she did not know where her conversation with Daniel would lead or how her future might unfold, she knew she would no longer shut herself away out of fear of disappointment, because the weekend had proven that she was still capable of warmth, courage, and emotional honesty. And as she stood at her window, watching the street outside come alive again, Emily felt grounded and hopeful, not because she expected a perfect ending, but because she had allowed herself to believe that new beginnings were still possible, even after everything she thought had already ended.